Hello, friends. Let's try to destroy something. Okay, let's tell the story. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I'm Megan Snarks, a police officer in rural Arkansas. In my time as a cop, I've seen some weird and traumatic stuff: murderers, rapists, unstable shoplifters. None of them come close to what I saw on the night of February 2, 2019. The memories still send chills up my spine. The time was 1 a.m. I was out on night patrol at a nearby town, bleary-eyed, fueled entirely by coffee. The streets were empty and the night was cold. Outside the wind huffed and puffed. My partner, Jack, was sitting in the passenger seat, fast asleep. His long, ginger hair covering his pale green eyes. Jack's a wonderful person, but a pretty useless cop. In another city, he would have been fired for incompetence long ago. Fortunately for him, our local agency is woefully understaffed. Unfortunately, this also means that all officers are overworked. I pulled over on the side of the road for a sip of coffee. As I raised the flask to my lips, the temperature in the car suddenly dropped. It was as cold inside the car as it was outside. The wind stopped blowing. An eerie silence filled the air. The only living things outside were the moths, attracted to the vehicle's headlights. My head began to nod. I was so tired. I slipped into the inky void of oblivion. After a time, I was roused by the crackle of my portable police radio. The tired voice of Phil, one of my colleagues, echoed through the car. Someone had called the police. There had been a disturbance. We were to investigate. Disturbances were quite common on night patrols. Usually, it turned out to be a loud neighbor's party. I shook Jack awake, mainly out of jealousy, and hit the road. It took us a little more than 5 minutes to reach the address Phil had given. In front of us was a 3-story high mansion. It had grey, stone walls, large arched windows and 2 towers protruding from a black roof. The garden was overgrown with grass and weeds. Scattered haphazardly were red and white tulips and dark brown trees. I couldn't help but wonder how this place had remained hidden from me all those years, in such a small town. A raven landed on the bonnet of the car. It started in dust for a second, then fluttered its black wings and flew off into the distance. "Right," said Jack. "I'm going to keep watch in the car while you go out and find the disturbance at their not at all creepy house whose owner thinks Halloween is every day of the year. If you need backup, I'll radio the station." "Okay," I responded, knowing it was pointless trying to argue with Jack. I attempted to put on a brave face, trying, and failing to convince myself that the house was completely normal. I climbed out of the car, pushed open the squeaky gate and walked through the mess of a garden to the front door. Butterflies fluttered through my stomach. My skin was cold and clammy. The door was made of dark oak. The lock was carved to look like the mouth of a gargoyle. I raised my hand and gingerly knocked. The wind swung the unlocked door open, revealing a large room. The only light was from an enormous fire in the fireplace, which illuminated the Victorian furniture. I stepped forward. A short man in a white suit walked out of one of the many doors leaving the room. In his hands were a mug. "I'm sorry to intrude," I said. "I'm Officer Megan Snarks. I received a complaint that there was a disturbance at your residence. You look cold, please drink," the man said in a deep, somber, slightly British accent. He offered me the mug. I looked at it suspiciously, but decided to be polite, raised it to my lips and took a small sip. It was plain, ordinary coffee. I drank deeply. "My name is Ivan," he said calmly. I continued to drink. "My master has been expecting you." I drained the mug. "You should rest first. You look exhausted." I felt queasy. I reached for my pistol but was stopped by a sharp pain in my stomach. I dropped the empty mug. I fell to my knees. The entire world flashed red and went black. I passed into sleep, filled with nightmares of leering lords with yellow eyes and butlers offering me chalices of poison. My mind drifted out of dreamland. Was I dead? No. I couldn't be. My vision was black and empty, but I could feel something on my skin. It felt like satin. Satin bed sheets. My clothes were different too. They were soft and smooth, soft as silk. The memories of what had happened reappeared. I sat up suddenly and looked around. If I was drugged by a crazy guy in a gothic house, then how did I wake up in a soft bed, wearing silken clothes? Suddenly, I felt something grab my leg. I screamed and winced in pain as what felt like sharp claws dug into my calf. The grip tightened, and I was helplessly dragged down, off of the bed. Bruised and battered, I reached in the darkness for anything. Fortunately, luck was with me for that one. I felt something, lying on the floor, beside me. As I was being pulled away, I groped at the object, felt a switch and flipped it. Light flooded the room, and the hand released its grip. I could hear the sound of something slinking away. I stumbled to my feet and found myself standing in a cold stone chamber. There were no furnishings, apart from a bed with satin sheets, and a single electric lamp, lying on the floor, connected to a wall socket through a long black wire. I was wearing a silken dress and flat shoes. Beautiful, yes. But not very practical for a police officer being kept hostage. My uniform was nowhere to be found. The realization hit me. I didn't have a walkie-talkie or a gun. I was defenseless and unable to get help. I was at the mercy of the sick, disgusting monster that had kidnapped me. This made my priorities clear. I needed to escape. Crouching low, I carefully crept through the open arched doorway into an enormous hall. There was a sprawling oak table that extended across to the lit fireplace on the other side of the room. The table was beautifully laid with a crimson-red tablecloth, French candle holders, napkins, cutlery, plates, and a feast fit for a lord. My mouth watered at the sight of the silver dishes of roast chicken, steaks, vegetables, bread, and countless other wonderful things. It had clearly been a long time since I had last eaten. Scattered at random intervals were enormous doors leading off into other places. There were 4 chairs, one at each corner of the hall, each with its back to me, facing the wall. The place was silent as death, even the fire did not make a sound. If I didn't know any better, I would think I was in Count Dracula's castle, I said aloud. I immediately raised a hand to my mouth, looked around fearfully and sighed softly. The room was still empty and I could hear no approaching footsteps. No one had heard me. I was safe. Not quite, mused a voice. "Who's there?" I whimpered. I must admit, very few of my guests have looked quite this appetizing. The voice continued. Spooked, I grabbed a fork off of the table and held it tight. I raised my hands to my chest and prepared to fight for my life. "Show yourself." The temperature immediately dropped. The color of the fire in the fireplace changed from a warm red to a sharp, haunting green. "Hello," said a voice behind me. The voice was soft but raspy, with a strange accent I couldn't quite place. I stood, the quavering, and slowly turned around. Before I was a towering figure. He was at least 9 feet tall, with pale skin, hazel brown eyes and coal black hair. The face was mature and handsome, with a calm smile. He seemed to be in his late 30s. He wore a black shirt, black pants, and glossy black shoes. Behind him draped a cape with a purple interior. One of his pale, clawed hands rested on a cane with an octopus-shaped handle. In other words, he looked like a stereotypical Victorian vampire. I slowly raised my hands into the air. "Who are you, and what do you want?" I asked. He laughed. His mad cackles echoed throughout the room. "I am Lord Samuelsiad von Eldritch, and in case you haven't figured it out yet, I am a vampire." Now, I didn't believe in vampires. I thought this was just some crazy madman. After all, there aren't many lords in small-town Arkansas still. He was dangerous. The vampire turned and walked towards one of the chairs in the corners of the room. He slowly and deliberately picked it up, carried it towards me, and set it down. He turned it around to face me. Huddled up on the blue seat, shaking with terror, was my colleague, Jake. "Let him go, you monster," I hissed. "I'm afraid I need to feed." The Lord turned to Jake. "He is a traitor," he muttered. The Lord's eyes rolled back. His pupils became red islands in an ocean of black, crisscrossed by bridges of veins. He raised his head, revealing a pair of long, razor-sharp fangs. I turned and ran away like hell, to the other side of the hall. Behind me, I heard screams. The sickening sound of indulgent slurping and lip-smacking drowned them out. Then, the screams were ended by the thud of a body falling to the floor. Panic surged through my veins. There was a psychopath behind me who had feasted on the blood of my colleague. I dared to glance back, and saw the vampire speeding down the hall towards me. His legs a silent blur. A snarl on his face. I quickly turned and dashed through the open doorway to the left of me. I slammed the door shut, and bolted it using the iron key placed in the lock. I ran down another hall, as fast as I could, my legs screaming in agony. A black cloud of swirling mist appeared in front of me. It solidified into the form of the vampire. I stood, frozen, dumbfounded. His eyes began to blaze red, like hellfire. The world spun out of control. I broke out of my daze and turned to run back to the hall, but instead tripped over my own feet, and fell to the ground,